The next talk will be by Allison Bridges, Environmental Governance in China. Excuse me, Identifying Pathways for Cooperative Sustainability Planning.
My name is Allison Bridges, and I'm a postdoc in the research program on sustainability policy and management. And a lot of what our research program does is work to identify different tools and strategies that help decision makers reach sustainability targets. And this could be either in an organization or government. I come from an urban planning background, so my work is in municipal governance. So today I'm going to share with you just a small part of the work we're doing. Before I joined the research program as a postdoc last year, there was a large public opinion survey specifically on sustainability that was conducted in China, in Henan province. So it was a large amount of data. It was about an hour-long survey. There were over 3,000 participants in the survey. So it was a lot of information. So I'm really going to just present the results of one specific question today and then talk a little bit about how the public opinion matches up with the development priorities of the government as well as the Sustainable Development Goals, and then talk a little bit about how we can use this information to develop better pathways for public engagement in Chinese cities. So just a little bit about the survey. This is where the survey was conducted in Henan province. The capital is Zhengzhou, and that's the top northernmost city there in the inset. And the population of Zhengzhou is about 10 million. It has the largest per capita GDP. Just south of there is Pingdingshan, which is a coal mining city. About over 40% of its local GDP is from the industrial sector. And then in the south is Jumadian, which is an agricultural city. About a quarter of its GDP comes from the agricultural sector. So the question that I'm going to present today that was asked on the survey was, how important do you think these issues are for urban sustainability? And this is just some of the issues here. There were actually 47 that people were asked to rank in the survey. The top ranked issue for all the survey participants was education, which is pretty much in line with surveys, similar surveys around the world. People seem to universally agree they want a better life for their children. But what was a little bit different in the Chinese survey was that air quality was actually second ranked. This is a little bit out of character. A lot of countries will rank health or government transparency and corruption or safety a little bit higher than a lot of environmental health issues. So the fact that this was so prominent across the entire survey sample is interesting for China. There's my colleague Dong Guo has published more on the demographic differences of the survey sample, so I'm just really going to focus on some inner city differences and the comparison to the government priorities today. This is just a photo that was taken in Zhengzhou. This was kind of a publicity stunt, but also an awareness raising campaign that was conducted by a nature reserve in Henan province, and they packaged air in their nature reserve and brought it down to Zhengzhou just to kind of raise awareness of air quality. But what was really interesting was the turnout was immense. People brought their children, they brought sick people, they brought their elderly parents to line up. The lines were very, very long for several hours just to breathe the mountain air. So it just speaks to how important the issue is to people and how much awareness has been raised. So just to show you quickly, I know this is very small, bit of an eye exam, but just to show you quickly that there was general consensus across the sample population across the three cities. There's some statistically significant differences for some specific issues. In cities, for example, in Zhengzhou, people cared a little bit more about civic engagement. Transportation was also a little bit more important in Zhengzhou, the capital city, which is more populated, densely populated. But overall, you can see that closer to 1 is a high priority issue, and then closer to 5 or 4 is lower priority issues. So overall, you can see the trends. There's general agreement across the three cities. So that's why we looked at the sample population as a whole for this particular study. So this is also small. I'm going to zoom in the next slide, but just to explain what the graph is representing in this slide is around the outside of the graph is the Sustainable Development Goals. So the public opinions and the development priorities of the government are grouped thematically by the Sustainable Development Goals. And the black line is the public opinion. So the percentage of people choosing very important for that particular issue. You can see the closer it is to the perimeter of the circle, the more people felt that that issue was important. And then the green line is the development priorities of the central government as reflected in the 13th five-year plan, which is the overarching development document for the whole country. That sets the priority goals in five-year periods. So right now it's the 13th five-year plan. And this was just a qualitative document analysis using keyword frequencies and keywords in context, and then put on a percent relative range to compare it to the other data. So you can see kind of where the government priorities for development are in alignment with the public priorities and where they're out of alignment, and how this reflects on the SDGs. So just to look a little closely at the top of the graph, you can see that there's emphasis placed on poverty as well as education in the 13th five-year plan. Those were also relatively strong. Education was the strongest area of interest for the public. Poverty, not so much. Poverty is more of a rural issue in China, but you can see a heavy emphasis on infrastructure on the right side of the graph, whereas the public wasn't as concerned about infrastructure improvements, whereas the government emphasizes infrastructure, as well as technology and innovation. On the left part of the graph, you can see the strong emphasis on government corruption and accountability and efficiency that the public expressed, whereas these issues, how to address these issues, is not well formulated in the 13th five-year plan. Although the current president did run on a platform of anti-corruption, that's not well reflected in the 13th five-year plan. And also biodiversity was low interest for the public as well as the government priorities. On the bottom of the graph, you can see, again, the strong public interest in environmental health issues. That's water quality, soil quality, and air quality. Strong emphasis, again, on infrastructure and innovation on the government side. There was consensus, if you will, between the public and the government that things like access to religious sites, historic preservation are not high priority issues. So then thinking through how we use this information, if you go to any sustainable development conference, there's a strong emphasis on public participation in the planning process, co-production of knowledge, and how you manage this process. It can be highly contentious and conflict-filled, managing the process of bringing in scientific opinions, public opinions, and then planning decisions at the local level is often fraught with conflict. So different cities around the world, given this, are managing this process in different ways. In New York, for example, it's often contracted out to outside consultants to manage the process of public consultation. In Brazil, where I did my dissertation, it's federally mandated to have public participation in the planning process, so the government manages that process, and it can often be corrupt. Sometimes it's handled well. In the case of China, there is a central level government mandate to include the public as much as you can in people-centered urbanization, but on the ground that doesn't tend to happen. Information exchange tends to be one way through traditional media outlets or public forums where the government presents showcases its achievements. There might be some interviews on broadcast television, again in the traditional media. In Zhengzhou, where this survey was undertaken, there is increasingly a desire to engage with new media outlets such as WeChat or blogs, and they're trying to have a Green Zhengzhou movement. So there's some acknowledgement that those are important media outlets, but it's still limited in terms of public participation. So in terms of thinking through the different aspects of local level governance and how the public can participate in the process, at one level there's policy and goal setting, so that has to do with the official policies and the legislation around those policies and how the public can influence that process. On the other side, there's institutional innovation, so that's the actual structure of how the government conducts its business and how the public can influence implementation or project design, which is separate from legislation, and how the public can be involved in that. And then on the other side, there's sustainability metrics, setting your baseline, understanding your target and how you're going to get there, and charting your progress. In China, we're currently undergoing a process of trying to find best case practices where the public has been engaged with the local government, and it looks like the most common way for the local government to engage the public in a real way is through monitoring of data and transparency of data around environmental health, around air quality or water quality. If they've done it, that's how they've done it typically. So this is kind of where the research stands now. Now we're interviewing government officials in the local level Department of Environmental Protection, doing some questionnaires around what they're measuring, how they're measuring it, and whether or not the public is engaged in these same 3 cities where the survey took place. And then looking at how they're developing their programs. For example, the city of Zhengzhou has decided to focus on air quality. They have a new Battle for the Blue Sky program where they're doing some public outreach. Again, it's one way. The public isn't participating in how they should design the program, but they do have the WeChat and the blog. So we are going to start working with the local government to try to see what kind of pathways to citizen engagement are sort of the low-hanging fruit. If you have the public only expresses moderate support for low carbon growth, but if they are very supportive of clean air, then you can develop policies that have co-benefits. So that's just one example. There are other ways to develop policies with co-benefits. So if you are out of sync with the development priorities of the government and the public, you can focus on those areas. So for now, we're going to focus on environmental sustainability, working only with the Department of Environmental Protection, and maybe start to develop some applied research around citizen scientist programs and data transparency. So thank you. That's all. Thank you for your attention.
So I'll open it for questions, but perhaps you should just explain, in case there's anybody in the room who doesn't know, what SDGs are.
The Sustainable Development Goals are the next generation of the Millennium Development Goals, and I forget how many countries are signatory to the Paris Agreement now and the Agenda 2030, but the Sustainable Development Goals are 17 goals that UN signatories have agreed are important goals to strive for, and some of them are idealistic and some of them are very specific, and it covers the breadth of sustainability between equity, urban development, marine health, and so forth. I won't name them all.
Okay, thanks. So if there are questions, we can take them now or later.
There's a similar problem in India with air quality really being, particularly in this season. Can you share the lessons learned with the Indian researchers to understand how to conduct this research?
I would love to hear more about the Indian projects and how specifically the implementation process has gone. So if you have any recommendations, I would love to hear.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a very interesting presentation. I'm Frank, and I tried to get hold of you because the topic is of particular interest in my research. I'm not very surprised about air quality. China has shut down many coal plants, but instead they're bringing in shale gas. Did anything crop up in your research about that? Because the question really is about balancing the culprit gases whilst extracting. So the comparison would be to see to what extent the culprit gases will equate the coal. So that's particularly my question.
That's a good question. I think for the public opinion, it's only moderate priority, climate change and emissions at all. It's not high priority. For the government, for the 13th five-year plan, if you look at the plan, it seems to focus more on clean coal technologies, coal slurry technologies, because the focus is on economic growth still. So it's really about continuing economic growth, but altering things so that they're less damaging to the environment to the extent possible. So there's movement towards these other technologies. Particularly I'm thinking about Pingwucheng, which is the coal mining city that I was looking at. And in their development programs, they are looking for alternative means by which the economy can benefit from the coal that the city has, while also lowering carbon emissions. And I think it's a struggle. It continues to be a struggle.
Struggle everywhere. Thank you. If you think of other questions, there'll be time.